My story begins at the very party meant to celebrate my husband's promotion to CEO. David, the man for whom I had sacrificed my entire youth, the man I had built from the ground up, ordered his bodyguard to slap me 30 times while his beautiful young mistress watched as if it were theater. But just 30 minutes later, his prestigious CEO title and his vast fortune evaporated into thin air. He was kneeling at my feet, his voice raw with despair, crying, "Grace, you've ruined me." What could make a wife who had been gentle and patient for 10 years strike back with such devastating and precise cruelty? My story is long and heartbreaking. I only ask for your patience as I tell it. My name is Grace, a name my parents gave me, hoping my life would always be peaceful and serene. I've just turned 35, an age where one is said to have the maturity to understand the ebbs and flows of life. 10 years ago, I married David Miller, my husband. Back then, David was just a small-town boy who had come to New York City with nothing but empty pockets and a heart full of ambition. I was a recent finance graduate from Wharton with a summa cum laude degree. I turned down a lucrative job at Goldman Sachs to build a company with him from scratch. We endured the leanest of times together, sharing a single slice of pizza, pulling all-nighters to finish our first projects. Our love was forged in shared hardship and the absolute belief that, as long as we had each other, we could overcome any storm. And we did. Our small startup grew stronger by the day. With David's sharp business acumen and my strategic and financial support, he steadily made a name for himself in the cutthroat world of real estate development. 5 years after our wedding, with the company on solid ground, our first and only son, Leo, was born into what I believed was boundless happiness. It was then that I decided to step back, to become the steadfast support system for my husband's career. I believed that for a woman, family was the most important thing. Seeing my husband's success and our son's happy childhood, I thought my sacrifice was completely worth it. We moved into a luxurious penthouse on the Upper East Side, with panoramic views of the city, a life countless people dreamed of. I dedicated all my time to raising Leo, managing our home, and nurturing a good relationship with David's family. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was a traditional and somewhat stern woman. She always told me, "Men build empires, women build homes." She taught me that a wife's duty was to be patient and sacrificial, so her husband could focus on his great career. I took her words to heart, striving to be the perfect daughter-in-law and the devoted wife she expected me to be. Life moved on smoothly. David became more and more successful, his status climbing ever higher. Our company was acquired by a major corporation, and he was eventually appointed CEO of the entire construction group. He started leaving early and coming home late. Family dinners became rare, and business trips became relentless. I told myself this was the price of success. I didn't complain. I would just quietly wait for him to come home, preparing his favorite meals and ironing his shirts until they were perfectly crisp. I grew accustomed to taking Leo to school alone, attending parent-teacher conferences alone, and handling every household matter, big or small, by myself. I grew accustomed to the loneliness inside my own gilded cage. But about a year ago, I began to feel that something was wrong. David had changed. He was no longer the warm husband and gentle father he used to be. He became irritable and distant. His phone calls were always shrouded in secrecy. He'd step out onto the balcony or into the bathroom to answer them. He started paying more attention to his appearance, buying expensive designer suits and wearing colognes he'd never used before. A woman's intuition told me another figure had entered our lives. But whenever I tried to broach the subject, he would shut me down harshly. "Grace, don't be ridiculous. I'm buried in work. I don't have time for your petty insecurities." Other times, he'd be sarcastic. "Do you have too much time on your hands, sitting at home all day? Maybe if you got a job, you wouldn't have time for this nonsense." His words were like invisible knives, stabbing at my heart. I was in agony but didn't dare to make a scene. I was afraid. I was afraid that if the truth came out, the family I had painstakingly built over a decade would shatter. I was afraid my son would lose his perfect home, so I chose silence, deceiving myself that I was just being overly sensitive, that he was just under pressure from work. I tried to care for him even more, cooking better meals, dressing up for him at home, hoping to win back his wandering heart. But all my efforts were in vain. He remained cold, distant, and the nights he didn't come home at all became more frequent. And then, the fateful day arrived. David came home earlier than usual, his face beaming with excitement. He tossed his briefcase onto the sofa, pulled me into a hug, and announced, "Grace, they've made me CEO of the group." I stood frozen, my heart pounding. CEO. It was the highest position, the pinnacle of success he had chased for years. I should have been thrilled, proud, but for some reason, a vague sense of dread washed over me. I felt as if he and I were standing in two completely different worlds. He had ascended to a new height, while I was still just a housewife, confined to the kitchen. I managed a weak smile. "Congratulations." But he didn't seem to notice my unease. He talked excitedly about the upcoming inauguration party. "It's going to be huge, Grace. I've invited all our major partners, the entire board. You need to get a spectacular gown, something befitting the wife of a CEO," he said, his voice full of self-satisfaction. I just nodded silently, feeling a terrifying sense of alienation. He wasn't discussing it with me, he was giving me orders. I was no longer his life partner, sharing in his triumphs, but had become a decorative accessory, something required to complete his public image. In the following days, he threw himself into planning the party. He hired a professional event planning company and personally selected a lavish 5-star hotel in Midtown Manhattan as the venue. He didn't consult me on anything. I just watched in silence, my heart growing heavier each day. I went out on my own and chose an evening gown in a deep emerald green. It was an elegant, modest design, yet undeniably sophisticated. I wanted to look beautiful on his big day, a final attempt to assert my own value. The evening of the party, I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection. The woman looking back at me still had the traces of youth, but her eyes held a profound sadness. I applied my makeup carefully, trying to conceal the exhaustion from sleepless nights. When I came downstairs, David was already waiting, looking sharp in a tailored black tuxedo. He glanced at me from head to toe, a look of scrutiny, not admiration. He frowned slightly. "Why did you pick that color? It makes you look old." "Well, whatever. There's no time to change now. Let's go." His words were like a bucket of ice water poured over my soul. I walked to the car in silence, my heart constricting. I took a deep breath, trying to push away the dark clouds, to be the radiant wife standing by his side. But I had no idea that in just a few hours, in that very glamorous place, I would lose not only my smile but also my dignity, my honor, and the 10 years of my life that I had poured into that man. The 5-star hotel where the party was held was decorated like a palace. Dazzling crystal chandeliers illuminated the polished marble floors, reflecting the images of elegant guests in expensive attire. The air was filled with soft music, the clinking of champagne glasses, and a symphony of laughter and conversation, the soundtrack of success and power. I walked the red carpet on David's arm, forcing a bright, radiant smile to hide the emptiness and anxiety in my heart. All eyes were on us. They looked at him with admiration and praise, and at me with a mixture of curiosity and envy. The CEO's wife is so young and beautiful. David Miller is a lucky man, brilliant, with a perfect family. They're the golden couple of the New York business world. Those compliments should have made me happy, but they sounded bitter and hollow. I knew that in their eyes, I was just a shadow, an ornament accentuating my husband's glorious career. No one knew what I had sacrificed, what I had given up to get him to this day. David was basking in the attention. He pulled me around the room, introducing me to partners and VIPs. But his introductions were strange. He didn't say, "This is Grace, my wife, the woman who built this company with me." He simply said, "This is my wife." The title was formal and grand, but so incredibly distant. It felt like a job description, not a term of endearment for a beloved partner. I felt like a lifeless doll he was parading around to show the world his manufactured perfection. Throughout the party, he barely spoke to me. He was too busy with celebratory toasts, handshakes, and beaming smiles for his business associates. I stood quietly in a corner, holding a glass of red wine I never sipped, my eyes gazing blankly at the crowd. I felt lost, utterly alone at my own family's celebration. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was in her element. Dressed in a luxurious velvet gown, she moved through the room, her face glowing with pride. She boasted about her son, about the CEO position he had just secured, as if it were a victory for the entire family lineage. Seeing me standing alone, she approached with a hint of reproach. "Grace, why are you hiding here? You should be out there networking with your husband. You need to act like a CEO's wife, not some wallflower. People will talk." I just nodded meekly, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. I couldn't bring myself to participate in this charade. And then, she appeared. Just as the party reached its peak, a young woman in a fiery red gown that clung to her stunning figure made her entrance. She was very young, probably in her early 20s, with a sharp, beautiful face and provocative red lips. Every eye in the room turned to her. She wasn't alone. On her arm, holding her with an unmistakable intimacy, was none other than David Miller, my husband. In that instant, time stopped. A ringing filled my ears, my vision blurred, and my chest felt like it was being crushed. I stood frozen. The wine glass slipped from my hand and shattered on the floor, the glass shards scattering like the pieces of my heart. David didn't even look in my direction. He led the girls straight to the stage where a giant cake stood waiting. He took the microphone, his voice booming through the hall. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate with me. Today is a very special day for me. And to make this day even more perfect, I'd like to introduce someone even more special." He turned to the girl, his eyes filled with an adoration I hadn't seen in years. "This is Jessica. She has been by my side, encouraging me and giving me the inspiration to achieve everything I have today. She is my energy, my future." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. People exchanged confused glances. Some looked at me with pity. I stood there, the center of attention, feeling stripped bare before hundreds of eyes. Pain, humiliation, and rage swelled in my chest like a tidal wave, washing away the last of my composure. I didn't cry. My tears had run dry long ago. All I felt was a terrifying emptiness. 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of devotion, all repaid with this public degradation. He wasn't just having an affair, he was determined to trample on my honor, to completely erase my existence. My mother-in-law was stunned. Her jaw dropped, and her face went pale. She couldn't believe what her son had just done. She shot a look at me, her eyes a complex mix of anger and confusion. I took a deep, shuddering breath, summoning the last of my strength. I would not collapse here. I would not let them see me weak. I began to walk slowly toward the stage. Each step felt as heavy as lead, but my gaze was sharp and unwavering. David saw me approaching. He looked flustered for a moment but quickly regained his arrogant composure. The mistress, Jessica, looked at me with a defiant smirk, her lips curling into a victorious smile. I stopped a few feet from them. I didn't look at her. I looked directly into David's eyes. My voice trembled, but every word was clear. "David, can you explain this? Who is this woman? And what am I, your legal wife, the person who walked with you through the hardest of times? What am I to you now?" David's brow furrowed. His voice turned cold and cruel. "Grace, don't make a scene here. Can't you see you're embarrassing me? Go back to your seat. We'll talk about this at home." "Embarrassing you?" I let out a bitter laugh that chilled me to the bone. "You bring your mistress to your own party, introduce her like a queen, and I'm thrown aside like an old piece of furniture. Who is embarrassing whom?" Silence fell over the room. Everyone held their breath, watching the drama unfold. Jessica spoke up then, her voice sickly sweet but each word a needle in my ear. "Grace, you shouldn't make things difficult for David. There's no fault in love, only in being the one who is no longer loved. David and I are truly in love. You should know when to step aside gracefully." "Shut up!" I screamed, losing control for the first time in my life. "You have no right to speak to me." Seeing me enraged, David instinctively moved to shield his mistress. He glared at me, his voice a low, menacing growl. "Grace, I'm telling you for the last time, don't make me lose my temper. This is my celebration. Don't ruin it." "Ruin it?" Tears finally streamed down my face. You call this betrayal a celebration? David, are you even human? For 10 years I sacrificed everything for you, for this family. I gave up my career, I raised our son, I took care of your mother. And for what? For this humiliation? The anger and pain erased all my fear. I pointed a shaking finger at him, my voice breaking. You are a thankless, heartless man. You don't deserve anything you have. Perhaps my words struck a nerve in the newly appointed CEO. David's face flushed with rage. Without another word, he turned to the large bodyguard standing near the stage and gave a command so cold it froze my blood, a command I will never forget. Slap her for me. 30 times. Make her wake up. The entire room was stunned into silence. No one could believe that a successful, sophisticated man like David Miller could issue such a brutal order against his own wife in front of hundreds of guests. The bodyguard hesitated, but a murderous look from David made him nod and step toward me. I stood perfectly still, my body trembling, not from fear, but from absolute horror. The man I once loved, the father of my child, could treat me like this. Beside him, Jessica crossed her arms, a look of pure satisfaction on her face. She was ready for the show. Just as the bodyguard's massive hand was about to strike my face, a strange calm washed over me. The pain had morphed into hatred. Weakness was replaced by an iron will. I knew, from this moment on, everything between David and me was over, and he was about to pay a very, very high price for what he had done today. He had no idea that the tragedy he was directing was merely the prelude to his own downfall. The bodyguard's hand was still in midair, not yet touching my cheek. When I took a step back, I lifted my chin, my gaze locking onto his, cold and sharp. My voice wasn't loud, but in the dead silence of the room, every word was crystal clear. You touch me, and I guarantee that by tomorrow your entire family will have no place to hide in this city. My words carried an undeniable threat. The bodyguard froze, his large hand trembling as his eyes widened in confusion. He was just a man on a payroll, loyal to David, yes, but not foolish enough to invite ruin upon himself. He looked back at David, awaiting a different order. David's face turned purple with rage. He couldn't believe that his always gentle, submissive wife could utter such defiant words. He roared, "Are you deaf? I told you to slap her. I'll take responsibility for any consequences." But I didn't give him the chance. I turned to David, a faint, cold smile playing on my lips. "David, are you sure you can handle the consequences?" Then, without a moment's hesitation, I turned and walked away. Not toward the exit, but toward the side of the stage, where the staff entrance was located. Every eye followed my every step. They didn't understand what I was doing. They probably thought I was fleeing in humiliation. David and Jessica certainly did. They watched me with contempt, as if I were a pathetic loser. My mother-in-law rushed after me, grabbing my arm and whispering, "Grace, don't do anything foolish. Go home, I'll talk to him. Don't embarrass the family any further." I gently pulled my arm away, saying nothing, only giving her a look of pity and sorrow. She hadn't realized that the family she was so desperately trying to protect had already rotted from the inside. I stepped into the backstage area, where a few bewildered staff members stared at me. I ignored them, walked to a secluded corner, and took a small, simple phone out of my clutch. My hand was perfectly steady. I dialed a number saved under a very ordinary name, Arthur. The man on the other end picked up almost immediately. A deep, steady male voice said, "Yes?" I took a deep breath, my own voice surprisingly calm. "Arthur, it's time. Begin." It was a short, simple command. No explanation, no story. The voice on the other end simply replied, "Understood." I hung up, deleted the call from my history, and walked back out, but not to the ballroom. I took the fire exit and left that glamorous 5-star hotel behind, abandoning the drama that was about to reach its final act. I didn't go home. I walked aimlessly along the brightly lit streets. The cool night air on my face felt sobering. I didn't cry. I didn't feel pain anymore. All that remained was a vast emptiness and a strange sense of relief. The weight of the lies, the pretense, the years of silent suffering, it all seemed to have been lifted tonight. I had given him a chance, but he had destroyed it with his own hands. I glanced at my watch. 15 minutes had passed since my call. Everything must have already begun. Back in the ballroom, after I left, David tried to salvage the atmosphere. He grabbed the microphone, forced a laugh, and said, "Apologies for that little interruption, ladies and gentlemen. Please, let's continue the celebration." He signaled for the band to play something upbeat. Jessica clung to his arm, laughing and chatting, trying to pretend nothing had happened. But the mood in the room was irrevocably broken. The whispers and gossip continued. People looked at David differently now, with curiosity, but also with a hint of contempt. A man who could treat his wife so cruelly, could he really be trusted in business? And then, exactly 30 minutes after my phone call, the real storm hit. The phones of nearly every guest in the room buzzed and lit up at once. The websites of the largest news outlets, the most respected business forums, all simultaneously published a bombshell story with a massive headline. Breaking. Newly appointed CEO of Miller Construction Group, David Miller, exposed for massive financial fraud, embezzling hundreds of millions. Accompanying the article was a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Scanned bank statements showing suspicious transactions worth tens of millions of dollars being funneled into personal offshore accounts. Phantom contracts signed with shell corporations. Audio files of David discussing kickback schemes and inflating project values with partners. Everything was clear, detailed, and verified down to the last dollar. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Everyone was glued to their phones, their faces turning pale. On the digital stock market tickers, Miller Construction Group's stock, MCG, instantly turned blood red, plummeting in a freefall. The major partners who had just been toasting David's success were now staring at him with anger and panic. David's phone began to ring incessantly. He answered it, his hand trembling. It was the vice chairman on the line, his voice frantic. "David, it's a disaster. All the evidence of your fraud is online. The shareholders are demanding an emergency meeting, and the SEC is already launching an investigation." David froze. The phone dropped from his hand, shattering on the marble floor. His face was ashen, drained of all color. He staggered, fumbling for his own phone to see the news. When he saw the evidence, his eyes widened in horror. He knew it was all real, and he knew there was only one person who could have possibly had access to all of it. He looked up, wildly searching the crowd for me, but I was gone. He bolted from the ballroom, sprinting down to the main lobby, and there he saw me. I was standing just outside the hotel entrance, as quiet as a ghost. A black town car was already waiting for me at the curb. David lunged toward me, grabbing my shoulders, his voice a crazed roar. "Grace, it was you, wasn't it? This was all you're doing." I didn't answer, just looked at him with an unnervingly calm expression. He shook me violently, his voice breaking with panic. "Why? Why would you do this? Do you want to destroy me? Destroy our family?" Finally, I spoke, my voice as cold as ice. "The one who destroyed everything wasn't me, David. It was you. The moment you ordered your bodyguard to slap me 30 times in front of your mistress, you signed the death warrant for your own career." David froze, and then, as if understanding everything at once, he collapsed. He fell to his knees, clutching at my legs, sobbing hysterically useless, belated tears. "Grace, I was wrong. I'm begging you, take it all back. Please, you've ruined me. You've ruined this family." I looked down at the man kneeling at my feet, the man I had once loved with all my being. The proud CEO was gone, replaced by the pathetic wreck of a failed man. I felt nothing, not satisfaction, not pity, only an infinite weariness. I gently pulled my leg away and took a step back. I turned and walked toward the waiting car, leaving him behind with his desperate cries and a career that had reached its zenith only to plunge into the abyss. The car door closed, sealing me off from the loud, false world behind me. But how did I get that evidence? And who was the man, Arthur, who helped me execute this flawless plan? This wasn't a spontaneous act of revenge carried out in 30 minutes. This was a storm I had been quietly cultivating for a very long time. Many might think my plan for revenge was an impulsive act, a desperate move by a woman pushed to her limit. But no, the storm that obliterated David Miller's career was not created in 30 minutes. It was the result of a long and agonizing process, of more than 6 months spent living in my own private hell, of tears swallowed back down, of pain that had solidified into cold resolve, and of a plan calculated down to the smallest detail. Let me take you back to the beginning. To the day I first realized the husband I had trusted implicitly no longer belonged to me. It started on a rainy afternoon more than 6 months ago. It was our son Leo's 8th birthday. I had spent the entire day preparing a small, cozy party at home, cooking all the dishes that he and David loved. I had called David in the morning to remind him to come home early to blow out the candles with his son. He promised without hesitation, "Don't worry, Grace. I'll be there for my boy, even if the world is ending." I believed him. Leo and I sat at the dining table, beside a birthday cake glittering with candles, and we waited. We waited from 6 p.m. to 7, then 8. The food grew cold on the table. The candles on the cake melted into puddles of wax. Leo, yawning, asked me, "Mommy, why isn't Daddy home yet? I'm so sleepy." My heart felt like it was being squeezed. I pulled him into my arms, trying to soothe him. "Daddy will be home soon, sweetie. He's probably just stuck in a last-minute meeting." But David never came home. It wasn't until almost 11 p.m., long after Leo had fallen asleep on my shoulder, that he stumbled in, completely drunk. On the collar of his white dress shirt, I saw a bright red lipstick stain, a shade I never wore. The overpowering scent of a woman's perfume, mixed with stale liquor, hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, my entire world collapsed. I didn't scream or demand answers. I just quietly helped him to the bedroom, changed his clothes, and then sat alone in the living room, staring out at the rain-streaked city lights. That night, I cried until I had no tears left. I cried for my own naivety, for 10 years of sacrifice being trampled underfoot, and for my sweet, innocent son. The next morning, when David woke up, he acted as if nothing had happened. He offered a cursory, "Sorry I missed the party," and then rushed to get ready for work. He didn't notice my swollen eyes or my unnerving silence. It was his indifference that killed the last shred of hope I had. I knew I couldn't live in this deception a day longer, but I also knew I couldn't act rashly. The David of today wasn't the penniless boy from years ago. He had status, power, and connections. If I caused a scene, I would be the one to lose everything. He could easily paint me as a hysterical, jealous wife. He could use his money to fight for custody of Leo. I would be left with nothing. Just as I was sinking into despair, an idea sparked in my mind. I would not be a victim. I would be a warrior. I had to find justice for myself. And to do that, I needed evidence. Irrefutable proof. But where would I start? I was just a housewife, long removed from the corporate world, with no connections of my own. I felt small and powerless. I considered hiring a private investigator, but worried about reliability and the risk of being exposed. I was trapped in a vortex of anxiety, losing sleep and weight day by day. Then, one day, while cleaning out my late father's old study, I stumbled upon one of his old address books. Flipping through the yellowed pages, my finger stopped at a name, Arthur Vance. Below it was a phone number. Arthur. I remembered him. He was my father's best friend, his most trusted business partner. When I was a little girl, he would visit our house, lift me into his arms, and give me candy. He was a successful businessman in his own right, a man my father deeply respected for his integrity and brilliance. After my father passed away, our families had lost touch. I had no idea if the number was still in service, but in my desperation, I decided to take a chance. Mustering all my courage, I dialed the number, my heart pounding. After a few rings, a familiar, deep male voice answered. "Hello? Mr. Vance? Is this you?" I stammered. "This is Grace, Frank Davis's daughter." There was a moment of silence on the other end, and then the voice softened with emotion. "Grace? It really is you. It's been too long. How are you? How is your family?" His warm voice was like a stream of cool water on my parched soul. I burst into tears, unable to hold it back any longer. Arthur seemed to sense that something was terribly wrong. He spoke gently. "Grace, don't cry. Whatever it is, you can tell me. I've always thought of you as a daughter. No matter what happens, I won't let you suffer alone." The next day, I met Arthur at a quiet, discreet coffee shop. I told him everything: David's changes, the lipstick stain, his cruel indifference. I told my story through tears and broken sentences. Arthur listened in silence, his expression hardening, his eyes flashing with anger. When I finished, he gently tapped the table, his voice firm. "That boy, David. To treat my friend's daughter this way, this will not stand. Grace, don't you worry, I will help you." I looked at him, hesitant. "But Arthur, he's so powerful now. I'm afraid." Arthur cut me off, his gaze sharp. "Power? In this life, Grace, no one can hide from the truth forever. What's important now is that we act smartly. What do you want? Do you want an amicable divorce with a settlement? Or do you want him to pay for every single thing he's done to you?" I looked at him. The image of a drunken David on our son's birthday flashing in my mind, the garish red lipstick, the contemptuous sneer when I tried to save our marriage. A fire of pure hatred ignited within me. I clenched my fists, my voice becoming cold and resolute. "I want him to pay, Arthur. I want him to lose everything he's so proud of, everything he built on my sacrifices." Arthur looked at me, a flicker of approval in his eyes. He nodded. "Good. You have your father's spirit. If that's your decision, I will help you all the way. But this path will be difficult and dangerous. Are you ready?" I looked him straight in the eye, without a trace of doubt. "I'm ready." From that day forward, I was no longer the weak, submissive Grace of the past. I became someone else, a woman living with a single purpose: to unmask the real David Miller. Our plan began to take shape, a meticulous, detailed strategy, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver the final, decisive blow. What happened at the party tonight was just the foretold conclusion to a play of deceit. But how did we gather that secret financial evidence, and how deeply was Arthur involved? That is another long story. After that fateful meeting with Arthur, I felt a surge of invisible strength. I was no longer alone or helpless. I knew I had a solid pillar of support behind me, a man who had not only the financial means and influence but, more importantly, genuine trust and affection for me. Our plan was divided into two main phases. Phase 1, evidence gathering. Phase 2, awaiting the opportune moment to strike. Arthur made it clear to me that to take down a man at the peak of his power like David, evidence of an affair wasn't enough. In the high-stakes business world, infidelity was a common scandal. It might tarnish his reputation, but it wouldn't destroy his career. To make him fall, we had to hit him where it hurt the most: his finances and his legal standing. Arthur connected me with the most professional and trustworthy private investigation firm he knew. They weren't your typical PI agency. They were a team of real experts, including former FBI agents and cybersecurity specialists. Their fees were astronomical, but Arthur waved it off. "Money is not the issue, Grace. Justice is." The team's first task was to identify the mistress. Within 3 days, they had a complete file. Her name was Jessica Thorne, a B-list model known for gracing the parties of the city's elite. She had met David at a client event and, with her beauty and cunning, had quickly captured the heart of a man bored with his wife and craving novelty. But that wasn't all. The investigators discovered that Jessica wasn't just a mistress. Behind her was another man, one of David's business rivals, who was using her to extract inside information from the Miller Construction Group. Learning this, I felt a mix of fury and pity for David. He thought he had found true love, a new source of energy, but in reality, he was just another pawn in someone else's game. That pity vanished when I saw the photos the investigators sent. Photos of David and Jessica holding hands on shopping sprees at the most expensive boutiques on Fifth Avenue. Photos of them kissing in a luxurious penthouse he had bought for her. And the most painful, photos of them on vacation in Europe, while he had lied to me about an urgent business trip. Looking at those images, my heart felt like it was being pierced by 1,000 needles. But I didn't cry. I saved every single photo in a folder on my computer, which I named The Betrayal. Parallel to monitoring Jessica, the team's more critical mission was investigating David's finances. This was the hardest part, as David was meticulous and sophisticated in his transactions. Arthur had to leverage his own network to assist the team, calling in a favor from an old friend, a senior executive at a major bank, to help trace suspicious money flows. And then, the horrifying truths began to surface. It turned out David wasn't just using his own money to support his mistress. He had started embezzling from the company over 2 years ago. He had established a series of shell corporations registered under the names of trusted associates. He would then create fake construction and material supply contracts between the Miller Group and these fake companies, inflating the costs to siphon off millions. I sat in front of my computer, reading every report, examining every bank statement the team sent over. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from sheer disgust. The man I had once admired for his talent and drive was nothing but a greedy, unscrupulous criminal. He had abused the trust of the shareholders, the board of directors, and me, all to enrich himself. The amount he had stolen ran into the hundreds of millions, a staggering sum, enough for him and his mistress to live in luxury for the rest of their lives. I remembered the early days when we had to count every dollar. I remembered the times I had passed on buying a new dress for myself so he would have enough money to impress a client. In his eyes, all of my sacrifices must have been a joke. The deeper we dug, the more serious the crimes we uncovered. David wasn't just embezzling, he was also involved in bribing city officials to win major development contracts. He had built a sophisticated network of cronyism to cover his illegal activities. After reviewing the entire file, Arthur said only one thing. This man didn't just betray you, Grace. He betrayed the very career he built. He has dug his own grave. I sat there, in Arthur's office, surrounded by stacks of documents. I felt like I was facing a monster created from the greed and lies of the man I had shared my bed with. Arthur asked me, "Grace, with this evidence, we can hand him over to the authorities immediately. He'll face a very long prison sentence. Is that what you want?" I was silent for a long time, the image of our son, Leo, in my mind. If David went to prison, my son would grow up without a father. He would carry the stigma of being a criminal's son. That pain might be even greater than the betrayal I had endured. I looked at Arthur and shook my head, my voice hoarse. "I don't want him in prison, Arthur. At least, not for Leo's sake. I just want him to lose everything he's so proud of, his career, his status, and his arrogance. I want him to know what it feels like to fall from the highest peak into the deepest abyss the same way I felt." Arthur looked at me, first with surprise, then with understanding and respect. He nodded. "I understand. If that's what you want, we'll find another way. A way that doesn't involve the law courts, but is even more painful than prison." And that's when phase 2 of our plan was set in motion. We wouldn't report him to the police. We would turn this evidence into a weapon, a time bomb, and detonate it at the moment he least expected it, the moment he was at the pinnacle of his glory, the moment he felt he was the king of the world. The CEO inauguration party was the perfect stage for his spectacular downfall. But for that bomb to have the maximum impact, we needed one more element, an element that could shake the very foundations of the Miller Construction Group, and that was when Arthur's true role became clear. If the private investigators were the covert soldiers gathering ammunition, then Arthur was the brilliant general who devised the strategy for the final battle. After I decided against legal prosecution in favor of destroying David on the corporate battlefield, Arthur smiled a smile that was both wise and a little proud. "You've really grown up, Grace," he said. "Sometimes, the most painful punishment isn't physical confinement, but the complete collapse of the spirit. We will let David Miller experience that." Arthur began to lay out his plan. He explained that simply leaking the evidence of financial fraud online wasn't enough. It would cause a massive shock and send the stock into a nosedive, but with his connections and cunning, David might still find a way to wriggle out of it, blame a subordinate, use money to silence the media. To ensure he had no path to recovery, we needed to seize control from within. We had to become a powerful enough force inside the Miller Construction Group to decide his fate. I asked, bewildered, "But how? I'm just a minor shareholder, and you have no connection to the company." Arthur chuckled, the laugh of a seasoned veteran of countless corporate wars. "Who says I have no connection? In the world of high finance, Grace, anything is possible with enough capital and a perfect plan." And Arthur's plan was truly astonishing. He revealed that for the past 6 months, while I had been investigating David, he had been acting in secret. He had used a significant portion of his personal fortune and his connections in the financial world to establish a ghost investment fund. The fund wasn't in his name but was managed by a team of lawyers and financial experts he trusted implicitly. Then, this fund began a quiet campaign to acquire shares of the Miller Construction Group on the open market. They bought slowly, discreetly, without raising any alarms. A little each day, from small retail investors to larger shareholders looking to divest. They operated with such professionalism that no one, not even David and his board, realized a shark was silently circling their company. I listened, speechless. I couldn't believe that while I was drowning in grief and rage, Arthur had done something so monumental for me. He hadn't just offered comfort, he had invested his own wealth and energy to help me find justice. My eyes filled with tears. Arthur, why would you do all this for me? Arthur waved his hand, his gaze warm and distant. Grace, I'm not just doing this for you, I'm doing it for your father. Years ago, he and I had a dream, to build a strong, ethical company that contributed to society. But he passed away too soon, and I had to fight on my own. When I saw David, a talented young man, and the man you chose, I had hoped he could fulfill that dream in your father's place. But he went down the wrong path. He turned the company into a tool for his own illicit gain and betrayed everyone's trust. I'm doing this to clean up the mess he made, to restore some integrity to the industry, and most importantly, to protect the only daughter of my dearest friend, Frank Davis. Hearing his heartfelt words, I could only manage 2 words: thank you. A thank you that could never encompass the depth of my gratitude. Arthur continued, explaining that as of now, his investment fund held nearly 30% of the Miller Construction Group's shares. This stake was large enough to make us one of the most powerful shareholders, with a decisive voice in any board meeting. But it was all a secret. No one knew who truly owned the mysterious offshore fund. And now, Grace, Arthur said, his eyes sharp, the final piece of the puzzle is you. Me? I asked, surprised. Yes, I am going to transfer the entire 30% stake held by the fund into your name. You will become the owner of that stock. You will be the second largest shareholder in the corporation, second only to the state pension fund. I was stunned, stammering, "But I can't. I don't have the money. And I've been out of the business world for so long." Arthur smiled. "Who said you need money? Consider it a loan. Once this is all over, you can repay me from the dividends. As for experience, don't underestimate yourself. You have the talent, the intelligence your father passed down to you. 10 years as a homemaker might have dulled some skills, but it couldn't kill the instincts of a brilliant financial analyst. I will be by your side, guiding you every step of the way." I sat there, a whirlwind of emotions inside me, anxiety, fear, but also a burgeoning excitement, a flicker of pride. Arthur didn't just want to help me get revenge, he wanted to give me a chance to rebuild my life, to find myself again, to stop living as my husband's shadow. He wanted me to become Grace, independent, strong, and valuable in her own right. I took a deep breath, looked Arthur straight in the eye, and nodded decisively. "Yes, Arthur. I'll do it. I won't disappoint you or my father." From that day on, my life entered a new chapter. By day, I was still the gentle, patient housewife. I took care of Leo, prepared meals for David, and played the part of the uncomplaining wife to perfection. But at night, when the house was asleep, I became someone else. I devoured the documents Arthur sent me. I reread financial reports, analyzed the company's business strategies. I learned how a major shareholder thinks, how they make decisions. Arthur was a dedicated mentor, explaining every clause, analyzing every move on the corporate chessboard. Slowly, the financial knowledge I thought I had lost was reawakened, sharper and stronger than before. I was no longer the naive Grace of 10 years ago. I had been forged in the pain of betrayal and armed with the sharpest weapons. I was just waiting for the day David Miller ascended to his throne, which would also be the day I would make my official debut, not as his wife, but as his greatest adversary. The time bomb was set. Its trigger was the inauguration party, and the one to light the fuse would be me. But how could we detonate that bomb so perfectly that David would have absolutely no way out? That required one final, incredibly sophisticated calculation. Becoming a silent, major shareholder of the Miller Construction Group gave me an entirely new perspective. I was no longer an outsider, watching helplessly with rage. Now, I could see into every corner, every operation of the empire David was so proud to rule. Arthur arranged for me to have access to internal reports and meeting minutes that were reserved for major shareholders, all under the guise of the mysterious investment fund. Every night, while David was fast asleep after a night out or busy texting his mistress, I was at my computer, transformed into a true financial analyst. The numbers didn't lie. The deeper I delved into the reports, the clearer the sophisticated network of corruption David had woven became. He hadn't just embezzled money through fake contracts, he had abused his power to appoint his cronies to key positions, creating a loyal team to cover for one another. They manipulated projects together, dividing the profits reaped from the sweat and hard work of thousands of other employees. My disgust grew daily. It was no longer just the hatred of a betrayed wife, it was the outrage of an ethical businessperson against the immoral practices that were rotting the company from its core. Arthur and I knew that for the final blow to be truly devastating, we couldn't just rely on a public leak. That was a strike against public opinion. The decisive blow had to be a legal and structural power play within the corporation itself. And that's when the perfect trap was set. Arthur carefully analyzed the structure of the board of directors. Besides David and his cronies, there were other members, the original founding shareholders, dedicated individuals who had been gradually sidelined by David. They were dissatisfied but lacked the power to fight back. They were our potential allies. At Arthur's suggestion, I began a quiet outreach campaign. I didn't approach them myself. Instead, Arthur sent a lawyer representing our fund to meet secretly with each of these board members. The lawyer didn't say we wanted to overthrow David. He simply presented sharp analyses of the company's declining performance, pointed out questionable investment decisions, and planted seeds of doubt. At the same time, he presented a promising restructuring plan, a new vision for the corporation under different leadership. This move was masterful. Arthur framed it not as a personal vendetta, but as a fight for the survival and growth of the entire company. This resonated with the dedicated board members. They began to waver. Meanwhile, I had another mission, one that only I could accomplish: obtaining David's digital signature. Not a normal signature, but a highly secure cryptographic key he used for his most secret transactions, stored on a USB drive. Arthur said if we could get it, we could access top-secret documents that even the PI team couldn't touch. But how? David was incredibly paranoid. He carried that USB key with him at all times. After many sleepless nights, I decided to use his greatest weaknesses against him, his arrogance and his philandering. I knew that his mistress, Jessica, had a habit of demanding expensive gifts. I had my team track her and discovered she was currently coveting a limited edition handbag worth nearly $100,000. I knew she would ask David for it soon. I moved first. I had Arthur use his VIP status to purchase the bag ahead of time. Then, I set my stage. I chose an evening when David seemed particularly cheerful. I cooked a lavish meal, dressed beautifully, and acted exceptionally gentle. After dinner, I pretended to be sad and told him, "David, I know you've been working so hard lately. I also know I can't help much from home, but I just want to do something to make you happy." David looked surprised. I continued, "I heard your friend Jessica really likes a certain handbag. I found out it's very rare, but I managed to have someone track one down for me. I want to give it to her as a welcoming gift. I don't want people to think I'm a jealous, petty wife. I want everyone to see you have an understanding wife." David was completely caught off guard by my magnanimity. The arrogance of a man who believed he had both his wife and mistress peacefully in hand made him drop all his defenses. He looked at me with a mixture of surprise and satisfaction. You really mean that?" "Of course," I replied, acting my part perfectly. "As long as you're happy. But the international payment is a bit complicated, and I'm not familiar with it. Could you use your digital key to help me confirm the transaction?" I have everything ready. I handed him my tablet, which had a fake payment website already open, one created by Arthur's cybersecurity team. It looked identical to a legitimate international payment portal. David, without a shred of suspicion, even chuckled with self-satisfaction. "Of course, let me help you. You really are the most wonderful wife." He plugged his secure USB key into the tablet, entered his password, and clicked Confirm. In that instant, a hidden program activated. The entire contents of the USB drive, including the digital signature and all encrypted files, were copied and sent directly to our secure server in seconds. After the payment was complete, David removed the USB key, completely oblivious. He even praised me for being so thoughtful and promised to treat me better. I just smiled. But inside, a storm was raging. I felt disgusted by my own deception, but also thrilled that I had tricked him so spectacularly. With his digital key in our possession, we unlocked the final door to David's darkest secrets. We found the bribery contracts, the backroom deals to divide project profits, and a massive slush fund he had set up offshore. All of this evidence, combined with what the investigators had already gathered, created a nuclear bomb, powerful enough to obliterate David Miller's entire career and reputation. Everything was ready. We were just waiting for one final thing, the day he was officially appointed CEO. That would be the day he flew highest and the day he would fall the hardest. The trap was perfectly set, just waiting for the prey to walk into it. And my 30-minute phone call at the party was the signal to activate everything, leaking the evidence online, sending the complete file to the key shareholders, and demanding an emergency board meeting. It all happened simultaneously, as precise as a programmed machine, giving David Miller no time to react. But after David's fall, how would my mother-in-law and his family react, and what new battles would I have to face? The earthquake of David Miller's downfall didn't just shake the business world, it delivered a fatal blow to a family that had always prided itself on its prestige and power. That night, after I left, the party devolved into chaos. Guests fled, and the phones of Margaret and other family members rang off the hook. The news of the financial scandal had spread like wildfire. Our magnificent penthouse, once a symbol of success, was now shrouded in an atmosphere of gloom and suffocating tension. I didn't go home right away. Arthur had arranged for me and Leo to stay at a high-end, secure, serviced apartment. He said I needed to stay out of the storm's eye, away from the impending hysteria of the Miller family. He had already arranged for someone to pick Leo up from school that afternoon and bring him directly there. My son knew nothing of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Seeing him sleeping soundly, his face so innocent, my heart ached but also felt a sense of comfort. I had done all of this to protect his future, so he wouldn't have to grow up in a family built on lies and crime. As Arthur predicted, the very next morning, my mother-in-law, Margaret, managed to get the apartment's number and called me. Her voice wasn't its usual tone of reproach, it was the frantic scream of a wounded animal. "Grace, you venomous snake, you've destroyed my son. You've destroyed this entire family. You get back here right now and face me." I replied calmly, "Margaret, I'm not coming back. That place is no longer my home." "How dare you?" she shrieked. "Don't think this is over. You've ruined our family's honor. I will not let you get away with this. If you don't come back, I will find you." I knew she wasn't making an empty threat. She was a bitter and manipulative woman. But I was no longer the meek daughter-in-law who only knew how to bow her head in obedience. I was prepared. My voice was cold as I told her, "Margaret, I suggest you calm down. Your son wasn't destroyed by me. He destroyed himself. If you continue to cause trouble, I'm afraid the evidence of his bribery will also find its way to the district attorney's office. At that point, it won't just be about losing his CEO title." My words were like a bucket of ice water on her rage. She fell silent. She knew I wasn't bluffing. Embezzlement was bad, but bribery could put David behind bars for a very long time. She hissed into the phone, You're threatening me." "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm stating a fact. I'm giving you and David two choices. 1, a quiet divorce. I get full custody of Leo and a fair share of the assets I helped build. I will not release the remaining evidence. 2, you continue to fight me, and we can all watch and see how many years in prison David gets. The choice is yours." I hung up, giving her no chance to respond. My hand holding the phone trembled. I am not a cruel person, but I knew that with people like my mother-in-law, only absolute firmness would make them back down. I waited all day. I knew that in that penthouse, an emergency family meeting was surely taking place. They were weighing their options, calculating the trade-off between losing face, losing money, and their precious son going to prison. That evening, David called me. His voice held none of the arrogance of a CEO, nor the pathetic desperation of the previous night. Instead, it was filled with an all-consuming weariness and bitterness. "Grace, you won. You've destroyed everything I ever had." I remained silent. He continued, his voice pleading. "My mother." She collapsed. "She's in the hospital. Can you just let this go? I'll agree to the divorce. I'll give you whatever I want. Just please, don't push me over the edge. Think of Leo. He can't have a father in prison." Hearing him mention our son, my heart twisted. That was my only weakness. I didn't want Leo to be hurt, but I also knew that my forgiveness could be a grave mistake. I took a deep breath. "David, you have no right to talk about our son. Did you think of him when you were with your mistress, when you humiliated me? But you're right, I don't want him to be ashamed of his father." I paused, then laid out my final conditions. "Fine. I won't press further charges. In return, you will sign the divorce papers without any conditions. All assets held in both our names, including the penthouse, will be mine. You will relinquish all custody rights to Leo, with visitation only granted at my discretion. And most importantly, you and your family are to never disturb my son's life or mine ever again." There was a long silence on the other end. I knew these were harsh terms. He would lose everything: wife, son, home, fortune. But that was the price he had to pay. Finally, he spoke, his voice a hoarse, lifeless whisper. "Fine, I agree." The call ended. I slumped to the floor, tears streaming down my face. I had won, but I felt no joy, only a terrifying emptiness. 10 years of marriage ending in a cold, ruthless transaction. A few days later, David and I met at Arthur's lawyer's office. He looked gaunt and exhausted. The confidence in his eyes was gone, replaced by weariness and defeat. He didn't look at me, silently signing every document the lawyer presented. When all the formalities were complete, just before he left, he finally turned to look at me, his expression complex. "Grace, there's one thing I have to ask. How did you know about all of it? The transactions, the accounts? Even my own CFO didn't know everything." I looked at him for the first time since that fateful night, not with hatred, but with a flicker of pity. My voice was even. "Because you forgot, David. You forgot that before I became a housewife, I was a top financial analyst. You underestimated me, and that was your biggest mistake." With that, I turned and walked away, and I never looked back. I knew that from this moment on, our lives would be two parallel lines, never to cross again. But would David truly let me go so easily? And would my bitter mother-in-law quietly accept the loss of her son, her grandson, and her fortune? I had a feeling the war was not truly over. After David signed the divorce papers and transferred the assets, I thought the nightmare was finally over. I had my freedom, full custody of Leo, and a financial foundation solid enough to start a new life. The penthouse, a place that held both my greatest happiness and my deepest pain, was now mine and my son's. I had it completely redecorated, throwing out everything that belonged to David, trying to erase every trace of his betrayal. I wanted to make it a true home for us, a place filled only with laughter and peace. Leo seemed to sense the change. He didn't ask about his father as much anymore, and was more cheerful and lively. Watching him play in the living room, my heart felt warm. I told myself that all my struggles were worth it. Arthur visited us often. He was more than an uncle or a mentor. He had become a father figure, always offering invaluable advice. He told me, "Now that you have the means, the assets, the shares in the company, you should return to the business world. Reclaim your value. Don't let your talent be buried. Grace, show David and the whole world that you can not only survive without him, but thrive." His words gave me the motivation I needed. I began to seriously consider a comeback, but life is never as smooth as one hopes. Just as I was finding my footing, David reappeared. He was no longer the defeated man from the lawyer's office. He came to me one afternoon looking utterly pathetic. He was wearing old clothes, his face was gaunt, and he had a scraggly beard. He stood outside the building's entrance, not daring to buzz, just staring up. I was playing with Leo in our private terrace garden and saw him. My heart sank. Leo spotted him too and shouted with joy, "Daddy!" He ran toward the entrance, hugging David's legs. David bent down and held our son, tears streaming down his face. He cried with regret and helplessness. I watched from a distance, my heart in turmoil. No matter how much I hated him, he was still Leo's father. I didn't want our son to see him like this. I walked over and said gently to Leo, "Sweetie, why don't you go inside? Mommy needs to talk to Daddy." Leo nodded obediently and ran back inside, leaving just the two of us. David looked up at me, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice hoarse. "Grace, I know I have no right, but please, let me see him more often. I miss him so much." I said nothing, he continued, his voice pleading. "After I lost everything, I realized what was truly precious. It wasn't the CEO title, it wasn't the money, it was you and Leo. I was wrong, Grace. I'm a monster, a man who doesn't deserve forgiveness. I was blinded by her, by greed." He began to recount his days after the fall. Jessica, upon seeing he had lost everything, had vanished without a word, taking the penthouse and all the money he had given her. Friends and partners who had once praised him now turned their backs. He had to sell his last car to pay off debts. He said he couldn't sleep at night, haunted by images of me and Leo. He was full of regret, so much so that he wished he were dead. Honestly, hearing his words, I felt a flicker of pity. I had once loved this man with all my heart. Seeing him fall from a powerful CEO to a broken, penniless man, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sorrow. But then, the image of him ordering the bodyguard to slap me 30 times flashed vividly in my mind. The image of Jessica's triumphant smirk, the shame I had endured. All of it formed a cold, hard wall, blocking any compassion I might have felt. I looked at him, my voice calm but distant. "David, your regret comes too late. It can't erase the wounds you inflicted on me. You can visit Leo. I won't stop that. But that's all. Between us, everything is over." David seemed unable to accept it. He knelt down and grabbed my hand, tears flowing freely. "Grace, I know I was wrong, but please give me a chance to make it right. I swear I'll change. I'll do anything to make it up to you and Leo. Can we please start over?" "Start over?" I laughed, a laugh more bitter than tears. "How can we start over when trust has been shattered into a million pieces? How can we start over when my heart already died once because of you? David, get up. Don't make yourself look even more pathetic in our son's eyes." With that, I turned, walked inside, and closed the door, leaving him kneeling there with his choked sobs. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, wondering if I had been too cruel. Was his remorse genuine? But reason prevailed. A man who could betray me once could do it again. My softness now could be the seed of another tragedy in the future. But I was wrong. David's appearance wasn't just a plea for forgiveness. Behind that pitiful facade was another plan, one far more sophisticated and venomous. A plan orchestrated by none other than my former mother-in-law, Margaret. She hadn't accepted defeat so easily. And once again, I was about to face a new war. One fought not with violence, but with the one weapon that could destroy me: my love for my son. While David was playing the part of the repentant man, Jessica Thorne, the mistress who had ignited the fire, was facing her own tragedy. After David's downfall, she quickly realized her golden ticket had expired. Without a second thought, she packed up all the designer clothes and cash David had lavished on her and disappeared from the penthouse. She thought she could simply walk away, find another wealthy benefactor, and resume her luxurious lifestyle. But she had underestimated Arthur, and she had underestimated me. Arthur had told me, "We can spare David for Leo's sake, but we cannot spare those who enabled his wrongdoing, especially the one who publicly humiliated you." He had his people track Jessica, not for petty revenge, but to reclaim what wasn't rightfully hers. Arthur gathered irrefutable proof that David had used embezzled company funds, illegal money, to buy Jessica the penthouse, the car, and to finance her lifestyle. Legally, all those assets were the proceeds of crime and had to be recovered to compensate the company and its shareholders. A week after she vanished, while Jessica was enjoying a vacation at a luxury resort, a group of men in dark suits, accompanied by a lawyer, found her. They weren't loud or violent. They simply served her with a court order demanding the return of all assets received from David Miller, including the penthouse, the sports car, and the millions of dollars in her bank accounts. Jessica was stunned. She screamed that they were gifts, that David had given them to her willingly, but the lawyer just smiled and presented the evidence of the illegal money trail. He explained that if she did not return them voluntarily, she would face federal charges for knowingly receiving and laundering stolen assets, a crime that carried a hefty prison sentence. Faced with the threat of jail time, Jessica completely fell apart. Her arrogant, triumphant demeanor vanished, replaced by sheer terror. She had no choice but to sign the papers and give everything back. In a single day, she went from a model living in the lap of luxury to being completely broke, even in debt from her lavish spending. But her tragedy didn't end there. David's scandal had made her infamous. The media branded her a shameless homewrecker and a gold digger. Her modeling career, already struggling, was over. No brand, no designer would associate with such a tainted image. Penniless and jobless, she was shunned by her friends and condemned by the public. She had to move out of her fancy apartment and back into a tiny, cramped room, a bitter reminder of the life she thought she had escaped. Unable to accept her rapid fall from grace, in a fit of desperation, she came looking for me. I was preparing dinner when the doorbell rang. I checked the security monitor and saw Jessica standing there, looking like a wreck. Her hair was a mess, her face was gaunt, and the sharp beauty she once had was gone. She was wearing cheap clothes, and her eyes were red with hatred. I didn't open the door. I wanted nothing to do with her. But she wouldn't leave. She started pounding on the door, screaming my name. "Grace, get out here, you bitch! You did this to me! You ruined my life and David's!" Her shouting attracted the attention of my neighbors. Not wanting a bigger scene, I opened the door. The moment she saw me, Jessica lunged, her hands like claws, ready to scratch my face. But the security guards Arthur had assigned to protect me and Leo quickly intervened, restraining her. She struggled, screaming obscenities. "This is all your fault. If it weren't for you, none of this would have happened. You're a vicious, two-faced monster. You pretended to be a saint just to stab everyone in the back." I looked at her without emotion. This person was both pathetic and pitiful. She had chosen this path herself. She had sown the seeds, and now she was reaping the harvest. My voice was calm. "Jessica, the person who ruined you wasn't me. It was your own greed and foolishness. Did you think you could build your happiness on someone else's pain? Did you think money could buy you everything? You were wrong. What you're experiencing now is simply the price of your choices." Jessica was speechless. She stared at me, her eyes a mixture of hatred and despair. "You got your husband back. You got the money back. You must be so pleased with yourself, right?" I shook my head. "I didn't get my husband back. We are divorced, and I have no reason to be pleased. My victory wasn't in taking you or David down. My victory was finding peace for my son and finding myself again. That's something you will never understand." I signaled for the guards to escort her away. She didn't resist this time, just stumbled away, a lonely, defeated figure. Watching her go, I felt no joy, only a deep weariness and a bitter lesson about life. Greed can elevate a person quickly, but it can also plunge them into the deepest pits of hell. Jessica's fate was sealed. But I didn't know that elsewhere. My former mother-in-law, Margaret, having witnessed her son's ruin and her former daughter-in-law's rise, was already plotting her next move. She realized a direct confrontation was useless. She decided to take a different path, one that targeted my only weakness, my love for my child. And David, in the role of the repentant father, was the most important piece in her new, insidious game of chess. The war wasn't over. It had just entered a new, quieter, and far more dangerous phase. My life with Leo settled into a deceptive calm. On the surface, everything seemed to have resolved. David no longer bothered me, and Margaret no longer appeared to scream insults. I began to immerse myself in my work at the corporation, under Arthur's guidance. With a 30% stake, I held a seat on the board of directors. At first, I was met with suspicion and scrutiny. They saw me as just a housewife who had gotten lucky, but I didn't give them a chance to look down on me. I used every bit of my financial knowledge, sharpened by the recent turmoil, to deliver incisive analyses and strategies. I identified loopholes in the old management system left by David and proposed effective restructuring solutions. Gradually, I earned the respect of the other board members. They began to see me in a new light as a capable professional. I felt alive again, like my true self. I was no longer just the CEO's wife. I was Grace, an independent and formidable businesswoman. But while I was busy rebuilding my life, another conspiracy was taking shape. Margaret, after the initial shock, refused to accept defeat. She couldn't stand the thought of her son losing everything and her grandson being taken from her. In her twisted mind, it was all my fault. She believed I had entrapped and destroyed her son, and she was determined to reclaim what was lost. Her primary target was Leo. She knew Leo was my only vulnerability. If she could get him on her side, she could use him as leverage to threaten me, to force me to return part of the assets, or even to accept David back into my life. To achieve this, she began to manipulate David. She stopped berating him and instead offered comfort, planting a toxic idea in his head. Everything you had, the penthouse, the money, it was all your hard work. Grace was just a freeloader. Now she's stolen it all. You can't let her get away with it. You have to get your son back. Leo is the heir to this family. He belongs with his father and his grandmother. You need to show him that life with us is better. Leo is your trump card to get everything back. Influenced by his mother and bitter over his losses, David's demeanor changed. The facade of remorse vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating determination to win back his son at any cost. He stopped pleading for my forgiveness. Instead, he began to weaponize his parental rights. By law, I have visitation rights. You can't stop me, he said coolly over the phone. I couldn't refuse. The law was on his side. I had to agree to let him see Leo every weekend, and that's when the new war began. Every time David came to pick up Leo, he brought mountains of expensive gifts, the latest toys, designer clothes. He took him to the most extravagant amusement parks and the fanciest restaurants. He tried to paint a picture of a glamorous, materialistic world, one that my simple, work-focused life couldn't provide. Leo, being a young child, was easily captivated. Every time he came back from a weekend with his father, he would have a new toy and stories about all the amazing places his dad had taken him. At first, I didn't think much of it, assuming it was his way of making up for lost time. But then I started noticing changes in Leo. He began making unreasonable demands. He complained that my cooking wasn't as good as the restaurants, that his toys at home were boring compared to what his dad bought him. Then one day, he said something that shattered my heart. "Mommy, I want to live with Daddy and Grandma. It's more fun over there. They have better toys." I was speechless. I couldn't believe that David and his mother would use their own child, their own grandson, as a tool, poisoning his innocent mind with materialism. The battle grew worse. David started bad-mouthing me to Leo, telling him that Mommy was too busy with work and didn't love him anymore. He said life with me was hard, and that only living with him and Grandma would be fun. Margaret did the same. Whenever David brought Leo to her house, she would hug her grandson and cry, telling him how much she missed him and how his cruel mother had torn them apart. They performed a perfect play, painting me as a terrible, selfish mother in our son's eyes. I was in agony. I tried to explain to Leo, to tell him that I loved him more than anything in the world. But how could an 8-year-old understand the complex schemes of adults? All he saw was that being with his dad meant being spoiled and getting everything he wanted, while being with his mom meant following rules and doing homework. An invisible wall began to grow between us. Leo became more withdrawn, speaking to me less. Sometimes I'd catch him secretly calling his grandmother, whispering something before quickly hanging up when he saw me. I knew I couldn't let this continue. They were trying to steal my son from me, not with force, but with the most sophisticated and cruel psychological manipulation. I talked to Arthur. He was furious but advised me to remain calm. "Grace, don't confront them directly. It will only put Leo in a more difficult position. We have to find another way. We have to let him see their true colors." But how? I felt completely lost, like I was losing this war. I could be strong in the boardroom. I could face down powerful opponents, but I crumbled before my son's tears and his growing distance. I realized this was their ultimate revenge. They weren't targeting my assets or my career. They were targeting the most precious thing I had left, my son's heart. And just when I was at my most desperate, something unexpected happened, an event that not only concerned my family but also unearthed an even darker secret of David Miller's, a secret that would change everything. While the silent, brutal war for Leo's affection was being waged, I had to carry on with my work at the corporation. With Arthur's guidance, I gained a firm grasp of the business operations. The board of directors appointed me as vice chairwoman, in charge of finance and strategy, a clear acknowledgement of my efforts and capabilities. In this new role, I had access to almost all company records, including documents from years past. I threw myself into work, partly as a way to escape the pain at home. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own, that I could create value, that I wasn't the freeloader Margaret claimed I was. And it was during this process, while reviewing old projects for restructuring, that I stumbled upon a terrifying secret. A secret that had been buried for 5 years, one far darker and more cruel than David's embezzlement. It was a luxury condominium project in Long Island City, one of the first major projects that had propelled David and the Miller Group to new heights. On the surface, it was a resounding success, bringing in enormous profits. But as I flipped through the dusty archived files, something felt wrong. The cost reports for construction materials showed irregularities. Key components like steel and concrete were recorded as top grade, with correspondingly high costs. But when I cross-referenced them with invoices from the suppliers, I found a huge discrepancy. It looked like there had been a fraudulent substitution of lower quality materials. My instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong. I asked a trusted civil engineer, a contact from Arthur, to secretly review the project's original blueprints and technical files. After a few days, he called me, his voice grave. "Madam Vice Chairwoman, we have a huge problem. For a building of this scale, the structural steel required by the design is of a very high grade. But based on inspection reports and some other documents I've found, I suspect a large portion of that steel was swapped out for a cheaper, inferior grade to cut costs. If this is true, the entire building's structural integrity is in serious jeopardy." A ringing filled my ears. A high-rise luxury condominium, home to hundreds of families, built with substandard materials, it meant the lives of thousands of people were hanging by a thread. I couldn't believe it. David, as greedy as he was, couldn't be so depraved as to gamble with human lives. But the documents didn't lie. I had my team dig deeper. And then, I found it. A file stamped, "Top Secret," buried deep in the archives. It was a report on a workplace accident that had occurred at that construction site 5 years ago. A large section of scaffolding had collapsed, killing 2 workers and injuring several others. But strangely, this accident had never been made public. Not a single mention in the press, no report filed with the city or OSHA. It had been perfectly covered up. Inside the file, I found a handwritten statement from the site manager at the time. He wrote that the scaffolding had collapsed because the reinforced concrete on that floor was substandard and couldn't bear the load. He stated he had repeatedly warned project management, led by David Miller himself, but his warnings were ignored. Then I found a document that made my blood run cold. It was a settlement agreement, signed by David and the families of the 2 deceased workers. He had paid them a massive sum, millions of dollars per family, in exchange for their absolute silence. He had used money to buy their silence, to cover up his crime, to bury the lives of 2 men beneath the foundation of his fraudulent success. I sat frozen in my office, a chill spreading through my body. David's career hadn't just been built on my sacrifices, it was built on the blood and tears of innocent people. He wasn't just an embezzler and a cheating husband. He was an indirect murderer, a cold-blooded monster who would trample over anything to get what he wanted. My hatred for him now transcended anything personal. This was about conscience, about morality, about human life. I thought of the hundreds of families living in that building, going about their daily lives, sleeping, eating, playing on a ticking time bomb, completely unaware. I could not stay silent. I called Arthur immediately and told him everything. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. I could feel his silent fury through the phone. Finally, he spoke, his voice hard as steel. "Grace, this cannot be ignored. We have to bring this to light. Not just for the 2 men who died, but for the safety of the thousands of people living there now. This is no longer just your fight. This is our responsibility to society." I knew, in that moment, that the war had entered a new chapter, one far more dangerous and brutal. Our opponents were no longer just David and Margaret, but the entire network of cronies who had helped him cover up this crime. They would not let us unearth the past easily. But I was no longer afraid. When I thought of the children playing in that condominium, children who could be the same age as my Leo, I knew what I had to do. I had to fight, not just to win back my son, but to win justice for the dead and protection for the living. And to do that, I needed a witness. The one person left who knew the truth of the accident 5 years ago. The site manager who wrote that report. But where was he? And would he have the courage to testify against such a powerful and ruthless force? Discovering the buried secret of the fatal accident gave Arthur and me a trump card that could end the entire game, but this card was also a double-edged sword. It could utterly destroy David Miller and his network, but it could also put our own lives in danger if we weren't careful. Men who would cover up a deadly crime would stop at nothing to silence anyone who threatened to expose them. Our most critical objective was to find Frank Peterson, the site manager from 5 years ago who had written the damning report. He was the only living witness, the key to unlocking justice. But after the accident, Mr. Peterson had vanished. Company records simply stated he had resigned, with no forwarding address. Arthur deployed his best team of private investigators to find him. The search dragged on for weeks. We were close to despair, thinking he had either been silenced permanently or had fled to a place he could never be found. Then, a breakthrough. The investigators discovered that his wife was still living in a remote, rural town in West Virginia. She lived alone, was in poor health, and rarely interacted with strangers. "This might be our only lead," Arthur said. "Grace, I think you should go yourself. Only your sincerity, as a mother also fighting for her child, might be able to reach them. But be extremely careful." I decided to go. I told my friends I was going on a business trip for a few days, and left Leo in the care of a trusted friend. Then, I took a bus to West Virginia alone. Arthur had 2 of his best men follow me discreetly for protection. The journey was long and tiring, but my heart was on fire. I didn't know what I would face. Would Mrs. Peterson even speak to me? Was her husband still alive? And if he was, would he dare to testify? Mrs. Peterson's house was a simple, old cottage tucked away on a small lane. When I arrived, she was sitting on her porch, her sad eyes gazing into the distance. She looked frail and weary. Seeing a stranger dressed in city clothes, she was immediately on guard. I greeted her politely and slowly began to speak. I didn't mention the accident at first. I told her my own story of being a single mother, fighting for her son, fighting for justice. I spoke of the sleepless nights, the pain in a mother's heart. My story seemed to touch the heart of this woman who had also endured so much suffering. The wariness in her eyes softened. After a while, feeling I had earned a sliver of her trust, I gently asked about her husband and the accident. As soon as I mentioned it, her expression changed dramatically. Her face went pale, and her hands began to shake. She waved her hands dismissively, her voice panicked. Don't talk about that. We don't know anything. Please, just leave." I knew she was terrified. I knelt before her, taking her cold, thin hands in mine, tears welling in my eyes. "Ma'am, I'm begging you. I know you and your husband have suffered immensely. But this isn't just about my family anymore. It's about the lives of thousands of people in that building. If it collapses, it will be a catastrophe. Please, just give me a chance to speak with your husband." Mrs. Peterson looked at me, her own eyes filling with tears. She began to cry, the sobs she had held back for 5 years finally breaking free. She told me that after the accident, David Miller had threatened her husband. He told Frank that if he ever said a word, his family would pay the price. He had his men stalk and terrorize them for months. Unable to bear the pressure, Frank had been forced to flee, living on the run, never daring to contact his wife and children directly, only managing to send a little money home now and then. She said her husband was a broken man, living in constant torment, blaming himself for failing to protect the men who had died and for being forced to live as a coward. Hearing her story, my hatred for David intensified. He wasn't just cruel, he was despicable. He had destroyed an honest family's life to hide his own crimes. I spoke with conviction. "Ma'am, things are different now. You and your husband don't have to suffer alone anymore. I have powerful support. We can protect you. If your husband is willing to stand up, I promise you, we will get justice for everyone." Mrs. Peterson looked at me for a long time, her eyes torn between fear and a new flicker of hope. Finally, she went inside and returned with an old cell phone. She dialed a number, her voice choked with emotion. "Honey, someone is here to see you. I think you should come home. Maybe it's time we stopped running." The next day, Frank Peterson came home. He was thinner and looked much older than his picture in the company file. His eyes were hollow, reflecting years of anxiety and exhaustion. When he met me, he sat in silence. I recounted everything: David's downfall, the evidence I had, and the imminent danger the building is in. I showed him the report he had written 5 years ago. Seeing his own handwriting, his weary shoulders began to shake. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed like a child, releasing 5 years of pent-up guilt and helplessness. When he finally composed himself, he looked at me, a resolve I hadn't seen before hardening his eyes. His voice was hoarse but firm. "Miss Miller, I have lived with this guilt for 5 years. It's time I did the right thing. I will testify. I will tell the whole truth. Even if it costs me my life. I can't let thousands of people live in danger, and I can't let my fallen brothers rest without justice." His words moved me deeply. I knew we now had the final, crucial piece of the puzzle. That very night, Arthur sent a team to relocate the Peterson family to a secure, undisclosed location. Everything was in place for the final confrontation. But we both knew that once we played this card, David and his network would not go down quietly. A storm even bigger and more violent than before was gathering on the horizon. And this time, it would be a battle for survival. Frank Peterson's agreement to testify escalated our fight to a whole new level. It was no longer a corporate scandal or a domestic dispute. It was a major criminal case with profound implications. Arthur immediately assembled a team of the best criminal defense lawyers in the country. The entire dossier evidence of the accident, Mr. Peterson's original report, and his new, detailed testimony was meticulously prepared and submitted directly to the U.S. Attorney's Office. When news of the reopened investigation began to leak, the Miller Construction Group was shaken to its core once again. But this time, the tremors came not from public opinion, but from the fear of those implicated. David, who was in custody awaiting trial for his financial crimes, completely broke down when he heard that Frank Peterson had reappeared. He knew his last shred of hope was gone. Embezzlement might land him in prison for a few years, but covering up a fatal accident and knowingly constructing an unsafe building could mean decades behind bars. As we predicted, David's network sprang into action. They couldn't let the truth come out, because if David went down for this, he would take them all with him. A series of dirty tricks began. First, they tried to bribe Mr. Peterson. They sent an envoy to his safe house with an offer of a staggering amount of money, far more than David had used to silence him years ago. They promised his family a new life overseas if he would just change his testimony and claim he was coerced into writing the original report. But Frank Peterson refused. 5 years of living in torment was enough. "Money can't buy back a man's conscience," he told them. "I'd rather die with a clear conscience than live rich with guilt." When bribery failed, they turned to intimidation. The Peterson family started receiving anonymous threats against their lives. Men were seen lurking around their secure location, trying to create a climate of fear. But thanks to the tight security provided by Arthur's team, all their plots failed. Simultaneously, they launched an attack on me. A vicious smear campaign, even worse than before, was unleashed online. They hired trolls to spread false rumors, painting me as a manipulative woman who would stop at nothing to seize control of the company, even fabricating stories to frame her ex-husband. They spun a narrative where I was the villain and David was the tragic victim. These lies, though baseless, had an impact. I was once again facing a storm of public pressure. There were days I didn't want to leave the house or read the news. My only source of strength was holding my son and seeing his innocent smile. But this time, I wasn't alone. Arthur used his own reputation to publicly refute the rumors. Respected journalists began their own investigations, publishing in-depth articles that exposed the truth behind the cursed condominium project. Public opinion began to shift. People started to see this not as a messy divorce, but as the serious criminal case it was. Finally, the day of the trial arrived. It was a case the entire nation was watching. David was brought into the courtroom in a prison jumpsuit, looking frail and defeated, his eyes empty. The arrogant CEO was gone forever. In the gallery, his mother, Margaret, was a shadow of her former self. She didn't cry or scream, she just sat there, her eyes vacant, staring at her son. The key witness, Frank Peterson, took the stand. He recounted the entire truth of the accident, his voice trembling but clear and strong. He described how David had threatened him, how he had lived in fear and guilt for years. His testimony, combined with our irrefutable evidence, painted a complete picture of the crimes committed by David Miller and his accomplices. The trial lasted for days. One by one, the members of David's corrupt network were exposed. Those who had colluded with him in embezzlement, bribery, and the cover-up could not escape justice. In his final statement to the court, David no longer denied his guilt. He stood, turned to face me where I sat in the front row, and bowed his head. His voice was hoarse, filled with a late, desperate remorse. "Grace, everything was my fault. I was driven by ambition and selfishness, and I lost everything. I hurt you, I failed our son, and I committed unforgivable crimes. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I only hope that after I have paid my debt to society, you and Leo can live in peace. I am truly, truly sorry." He broke down and wept, the tears of a man who had finally recognized the depth of his wrongdoing, but it was far too late. The verdict came down. David Miller received a very long sentence for a litany of crimes: embezzlement, bribery, criminal negligence causing death, and obstruction of justice. His entire network was dismantled and held accountable by the law. Justice, at long last, had been served. That day, as I walked out of the courthouse, the sky seemed unusually clear and bright. I held Leo tightly, taking a deep breath. The war was over, a long, painful war filled with blood and tears. I had won. But it wasn't a victory that brought joy. It was a victory for justice and truth, but it came at the cost of a family's complete destruction. Arthur came to my side and placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Grace. From now on, live a new life, a life worthy of everything you've endured." I looked at him and smiled through my tears. Yes, a new life. But what would that new life look like, and who would I become now that I had walked through the eye of the storm? After the final verdict, life shifted for everyone involved. David began his long years in prison, paying for his crimes. Margaret, after witnessing the complete ruin of her son and her family's name, suffered a breakdown. She sold her home and moved back to her small hometown, living a quiet, secluded life, stripped of her pride and arrogance. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she had aged considerably and rarely left her house. Perhaps, in her solitude, she finally understood her own mistakes, that her blind indulgence had helped push her son down his criminal path. I no longer hated her. I only felt a quiet sadness for the fate of a mother. As for me and Leo, we started a new journey. I sold the penthouse, a place that held too many painful memories. With part of the money, I bought a warm, sunny apartment overlooking a park. With the rest, along with the dividends from my corporate shares, I decided to do something more meaningful. I established a charitable foundation named The Grace Project, dedicated to providing free legal and psychological support to women who are victims of domestic abuse and betrayal. I wanted to use my story and my experience to empower other women, to let them know they are not alone and that they have the strength to reclaim their own lives. I continued my work at the corporation, but my ambition was no longer for power. My goal was to clean up the remnants of David's corruption and build an ethical, sustainable company based on integrity. With Arthur and the reformed board, we launched a major overhaul. We ordered a structural review of all past projects, especially the Long Island City condominium. Fortunately, experts concluded that while materials had been compromised, the core structure was not in immediate danger of collapse. We publicly disclosed the full truth to the residents and funded a massive project to reinforce and repair the entire building, ensuring their absolute safety. The act was costly, but it was a crucial first step in rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. My life was no longer about lavish parties and designer brands. It was simpler, but filled with meaning. Every morning, I took Leo to school. Every afternoon, I picked him up, and we would cook dinner and do homework together. On weekends, we would walk in the park or participate in activities for the foundation. I felt happy, a true happiness that came from inner peace, not from external wealth. Occasionally, I would take Leo to visit David in prison. I did this not because I had forgiven him, but because I didn't want my son to lose his father entirely. I wanted him to understand that although his dad had made terrible mistakes and was paying the price, he was still the man who gave him life. The David in prison was a changed man. He was quieter, the arrogance in his eyes replaced by a deep, abiding regret. Every time he saw Leo, he cried. He taught our son to be a good person, to always listen to his mother, and to never, ever follow in his father's footsteps. Seeing this, I felt a sense of closure. Perhaps the punishment of the law was the only thing that could have truly made him see the light. Arthur remained a constant presence in our lives, a father and a great friend. He watched me grow, watched me find myself again, and he was happy. "Grace," he would often say, "your Father in heaven would be so proud of you." Every time he said it, my eyes would sting with tears. I had not let my father down, I had not let Arthur down, and most importantly, I had not let myself down. One evening at sunset, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights begin to twinkle. Leo ran out and threw his arms around my neck, whispering, "Mommy, I love you more than anything in the world." I hugged him close, kissing his soft hair. A gentle evening breeze drifted by, carrying the sweet scent of flowers. I smiled. The war was truly over. I had weathered the greatest storm of my life. I had lost so much and suffered deeply, but in the end, I had found a safe harbor. It wasn't a man, and it wasn't a fortune. It was freedom in my soul, the unconditional love of my son, and the value of an honest life. I knew there would be more challenges ahead, but I was no longer afraid, because I knew that after the rain, the sun always shines. And I, Grace, had finally found the peace and serenity that my name had always promised.